Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Boy, have we got a show for you this week.
You know, if we're doing an intro like this, there's something special we want to say.
And that something special is that our guest this week, John Ziegler,
yes,
Pete, and myself are all unanimous in the fact that we're not in favor of letting a child molester, somebody who harmed children, out of prison. However, there is a very compelling story here that points to a man not getting a fair trial.
Yeah, there's some explaining to do.
So please listen to it with an open mind. We went into it really skeptical, both of us.
Absolutely.
And I think when we came out of it, we thought, well, this deserves another look.
Yeah.
So give it a listen. Please drop your comments on the website. Let us know what you think about this show, because this is quite a topic.
This is John Ziegler, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John and Pete.
Jerry thinks that God is going to save him here.
Yeah.
I mean, Jerry and Dottie are very religious people to the point where it has hindered my ability to help them.
Right.
Their friends have told them, it's an inside joke among their friends, because Dottie always says, we don't need to do anything because God will save us here. And their friends always say, well, maybe God sent you John Ziegler and you're not helping.
Yeah.
And I always laugh, well, God wouldn't send an asshole like me.
That's true, too.
So he probably would have found somebody better than me to do this. I'm an agnostic atheist. So, I mean, we don't mix. We're oil and water, Dottie Sandusky and I, because she's like the church lady.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's hung up on me for cursing. And I'm like, so this is the woman this is the woman who America thinks was baking cookies upstairs while her husband raped boys who were screaming in the basement. That's the perception that people have of this woman. And she hangs up on me because I curse. I mean,
have you been to their house?
Oh, many times. And
how far is the kitchen from the rapatorium?
It's absurd how close it is. Matt Lauer, when he came to interview Dottie Sandusky and myself 2 years ago, was stunned. He went down in that basement, the dungeon, whatever.
Yes.
And he's like, what? It's literally like an incredibly small flight of stairs in a small house. Right from the kitchen, you can hear anything that happens. I mean, anything that happens there. People lived in small houses like this, know what I'm talking about. There is absolutely no way someone was screaming in a basement and someone in the next floor, even 2 floors up, would not have heard it. It's impossible. And it's also, look, for you to believe this whole story, it has to be the biggest conspiracy that I've ever even heard of. And Jerry and Dottie have to be incredible criminal masterminds. And I know they're not, because I'm the only person that has been on both sides of the fence with them. I tried to get Jerry Sandusky to confess the first time I interviewed him in prison. I was told by Jim Clemente, FBI, former FBI guy who now works on Criminal Minds, who I believe personally to be a complete fraud, and all his theories about this case have been destructive and incorrect. And I believe he was paid, basically to bastardize himself, but that's another whole story of another day. But Jim Clemente, who I trusted at the time, mistakenly, told me, if you do this, this, and this, you will get Jerry Sandusky to confess. I'm like, great, fantastic. And believe me, no one would have been happier. No one would have been happier on the planet if I could have gotten Jerry Sandusky to confess. And so I did exactly what Jim Clemente told me. Bing, bang, boom. In fact, Clemente, when he heard the tape, said, you did exactly what I told you to do. Nothing. I got nothing close to a confession, I believe, because Jerry Sandusky is innocent. But the reality is, after the 2 interviews I did in prison, I flipped from he's guilty to sure looks innocent to me. So now I start trying to help them. So I'm on both sides of the fence. Because people want to say, well, what if there's a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing going on here, right?
Fair question.
Which I contemplated. Yeah. I mean, he was a defensive coordinator, alleged genius. Maybe his mind works in ways that I don't fully understand. Maybe he's able to pull off this amazing manipulation. Bullshit. Okay. I've been around the block.
Yeah.
I know people. He is the same fucking moron on one side of the fence as he is on the other. He has done as many stupid things when I've been trying to help him as he did, when I was on the other fence trying to get him to confess. He's not a dumb guy. He writes some of the most amazing letters you've ever seen. He's very eloquent in his writing. Ironically enough, that actually hurt him in the trial because he would write these beautiful letters to these kids, trying to convince them to get their lives in order. And the prosecution tried to use them as somehow.
They were painted as a love letter.
Exactly. They were painted as love letters. And there's nothing sexual in any of the letters, but those letters were actually put into evidence as somehow, aha, you know, a normal man wouldn't write these letters. Well, Jerry Sandusky's not a normal man. I mean, he's just not, for better or for worse. I've never received letters as eloquent as I get from Jerry Sandusky.
I'll write you a nice letter.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But I mean,
Pete, always aiming to please.
No, but my point is that he is a very good letter writer. So I'm not trying to say he's a dumb person, but football coaches, I believe, I joked earlier that God wouldn't have sent me to do this.
Right.
I don't believe in a God that does these types of things. There's no one who was better to understand this case than me, partially because I've coached football. I've been around a lot of football coaches. I understand, first of all, the culture and how absurd the McQueary story was. It's preposterous to anyone who understands the football culture. But I also understand the way football coaches' intelligence work. It's not the right terminology, but I've always referenced football coaches as kind of being like autistic in that they have an incredibly focused intelligence. Within the football arena, they're goddamn geniuses.
The football IQ is different.
Yes. You take them out of football, they are morons. They really don't even know how to function. And in a large way, that's what Jerry Sandusky was like, especially when you add in the 12-year-old kid element, because he didn't look at the world as everyone else does, for better, for worse.
Yeah.
You know, people have tried to come up with any rationalization they can for why I'm involved in this. I'm getting paid, which is preposterous, that somehow I think this is good for my career. It's not. It's been terrible for my life. Or somehow I was enamored by Jerry Sandusky. No. I think Jerry, I'm very ambivalent towards Jerry. I have told Jerry he's going to die in prison. I guarantee I have been harsher on Jerry Sandusky than anyone who's had contact with him in the last couple of years. I tell him all the time, you're being an idiot. You guys got to do this, this, and this. Why aren't you doing this, this, and that? He and his wife and I battle all the time, even though we went on national television together. I am not enamored. In fact, and no one would have been happier. I spent at least a year before I came out on the Today Show with Matt Lauer, and Matt Lauer declared my career over in the nicest way possible on national television on the Today Show. I spent a year hoping I could convince myself Jerry was guilty.
Right.
Because I didn't want this.
Just to spare yourself this cross to bear.
I didn't want this.
Yes.
Who would want this? But I also knew, holy shit, this seems like the truth to me. I'm pretty darn sure of it. And I'm the only one who can do anything about this. Yeah. I'm literally the only one. If there had been anybody else who could have voiced this.
This would be great to hand off to anybody
else.
Oh,
please. Anybody, please take this, because it's never, the funniest element of this from my perspective is, and I've told people this, and I believe it to be 100% true. Even if a miracle happens and Jerry gets exonerated and the whole thing is corrected, which you would think would mean, wow, that's Ziegler. Wow, what an amazing job he did. That's not going to happen for two reasons. The news media will need to destroy me. No matter if the miracle happens, the news media will need to destroy me in some way, because otherwise they look like assholes.
Yeah.
So here's what the narrative will be about John Ziegler if this ever gets fixed. And I'm not kidding. It sounds ludicrous, but it's true. The narrative will be, it's my fault. The media didn't understand this because I was an asshole, and because I wasn't super nice, and I didn't articulate it in a way that the media could embrace, because I was so abrasive and my tactics were so questionable and I took so many chances. I'm the reason they got it wrong. There is a narrative. If there ever is a narrative about John Ziegler, and this case ever gets fixed, that will be it, because they cannot. They put all their chips on this story. The news media did on Jerry Sandusky's guilt, because as we started this conversation, they never bothered to fucking check the math, because they're lazy and they're cowards.
Well,
they're lazy cowards.
We know this. We know this from the Duke story and everything else. And so here you have the story in ESPN, the magazine, that gets killed. I get that. As the editor, I get that. I don't want any part of this. You've got one little piece of this against child molestation.
Right.
ESPN's not going to, Disney is not going to come out.
Well, ESPN is in the fairy tale business because they're Disney. Disney is in the fairy tale business.
They're not going to come out against child abuse at all.
And therein lies
therein
lies one of the major keys to this case. If Jerry Sandusky had been accused of murdering people,
sure,
he would be in far better, assuming he didn't do it, he would be in far better shape than he is in this situation, because here we don't even have any dead bodies.
Right.
There's not even any evidence that any crime occurred.
Is there physical evidence of
well, that's the most amazing. No. And there should be massive.
Yes.
There should be massive.
We're talking about a kid who claims that he had been sexually abused by Jerry Sandusky 100 times over 3 years.
Aaron Fisher, yes.
Aaron Fisher should have some pair of dirty draws.
Thank you. I've always said, hold on a second. Part of the problem here, it's a big part, is that the topic is gross. No one wants to talk about it, okay? But if you're a teenage boy, I think about it from the standpoint of, okay, back when I was a single guy, if I had not this would ever happen with me, but if I ever had 100 encounters with a woman where we had oral sex, so she gave me oral sex 100 times, right? And let's pretend I was somehow living at home like Aaron Fisher is, and I'm bringing my laundry home. You don't think that one time mom is going to find something in the laundry that doesn't seem right? Not one time? Yeah. It's not possible. It's a messy act.
Yes.
There's no way. It's insane. Well, I always relate this to the O.J. Simpson case. I believe that the Jerry Sandusky case is in every single way O.J. flipped on its head. Because in O.J. you have massive evidence.
Right.
Massive evidence.
There's blood everywhere. Everybody's blood is everywhere.
There should be by the time all this has been investigated as much as it has, there's never been a case of child molestation in this country, to my knowledge, ever been more investigated than the Jerry Sandusky investigation. Yet you have nothing. You don't have a cell phone video, you don't have a diary, you don't have any pornography. No pornography, which is impossible in a case like this. By the way, the only pornography there is in this case, ironically enough, and this is causing all sorts of chaos in the state of Pennsylvania. Well, no, that unfortunately has not come out yet publicly, but no, that was a good one.
Thank you.
The investigators and the prosecutors and the judges, some of the judges in the case, are all embroiled in a porn scandal because during the investigation, they were sharing porn via their emails. But so the only porn, literally, sounds like hyperbole, the only porn found in the Jerry Sandusky case was on the investigators and the prosecutors and some of the judges. There's all sorts of things they should have found. There's no DNA. This would shock people, only one of the accusers who testified at trial claimed that Jerry Sandusky anally raped him. People think that's what Jerry went around doing, was anally raping people.
Yes.
One guy who came forward after Joe Paterno was fired, and therefore I believe is highly suspicious. He's number 9. I believe his testimony is a joke, literally, but figuratively. He says he was anally raped in the basement, screaming. His testimony is totally different than everyone else's. It's a horrible, horrendous, just awful thing. He could have easily, and I didn't know this at the time, there's a test, a medical test you can be given that shows whether or not you've ever been anally raped. Which makes sense if you think about it.
Sure.
None of that was ever presented at trial. So either he didn't have the test or he took the test and there was no evidence of it. So that would have been presented because it happened in recent years, by the way. His allegation was one of the most recent of any of them. No evidence of that. There's all sorts of things that should have been around as evidence that was never presented if this thing occurred. And one of them is, to me, how is it that not one of these kids contemporaneously told a friend, told a girlfriend, told a parent, told a guardian, wrote anything down? That's what I mentioned, diaries. I mean, you don't write something down. Oh my God, today I can't believe this happened.
Maybe football players don't write something down, but football players, athletes in general, especially in Pennsylvania, in State College, Pennsylvania, or the surrounding area, those athletes are taken care of. They have counselors who look after them. At some point, somebody would have said, man, Larry is a little not right. Let's take a look at Larry and let's see if we can get to the bottom of what's going on with Larry, because he's a great kid and he's a great football player. We want to take care of him. Larry, what's happening with you?
Can we talk about Aaron Fisher, number one, victim, because I think this dovetails perfectly.
And let me just, before we jump into that, let's just say this. There are clear signs of what child abuse presents itself as in the child. And okay, maybe one child is different, but we're talking a host of people that have been abused. There should be.
And I'm not a school faculty person, but one would think that somebody in that position, in that much contact with that many young people, would have some sort of training for what to look for when things aren't right.
Absolutely.
Well, I agree with you 1,000%. And I've also said, because I've coached numerous sports in recent years, football, golf, and basketball. And these kids are now trained since they first playing sports. If your coach even raises their voice to you, you go and you complain to your mom or dad or somebody. So the idea that somehow we could get to the point where, did anyone ever tell you it's wrong to have a coach stick their penis in your mouth? I mean,
or other places
in this era is ridiculous. I mean, but let's take this out of the theoretical and put it into the practical.
Okay.
Because this goes to number one victim, Aaron Fisher. Read his book. It's called Silent No More. It should be in the comedy section, because it's a flat out joke. He's the only accuser in this case for the first 2 years of the grand jury investigation. And to your point, no one around him has ever said to me he exhibited signs of being sexually abused by anybody. And I'm not talking about people who are Penn State fans looking to say that Aaron Fisher is a liar. Here's what I'm talking about. Here's a list of the people I have interviewed on the record against their self-interest. And you got to remember, Aaron Fisher is loaded. He is loaded. He's rich. He is well known. He is a media darling. He is protected. You can't criticize him or else, you're a bad person. So there's a lot of reasons for no one to come forward to say anything about Aaron Fisher. Here's who I have spoken to. I have spoken to, on the record, 2 of his girlfriends who say they're sure he's lying. I've spoken to 3 of his best friends during the time period when the abuse allegedly occurred, all of whom are positive he's lying, and 2 of them are still friends with him to this day, one of whom is a guy who's in the military who was sexually abused himself and who went to Aaron after he found out about this, because they never knew anything about it until it became public, and said to Aaron, hey, buddy,
I've been where you've been.
If you ever want to talk about it, let me know. Guess what Aaron does? Cuts him out. Not only doesn't talk to him about it, cuts off the friendship. Now, why do you do that? You do that because you don't want anyone around that knows
who can poke your holes.
You're full of crap.
Right.
You're full of crap. I've also spoken to the parent of the child who Aaron stayed over his house, according to him, dozens of times during this time period. Interestingly, one of the very few pieces of supposed physical, it wasn't actually physical evidence, but supposed evidence of abuse that Aaron claimed to have had with regard to Jerry was that he started wetting the bed at the time period when he met Jerry, when he was 12 years old. Now, that would seemingly be a sign, okay,
could be.
Sure.
Sure.
Except I spoke to the guy whose house he stayed over dozens of times over years, and the guy tells me that's not true. He started wetting the bed way before he met Jerry Sandusky.
Boys do.
We have the bed. In fact, he even offered to do a DNA test on the bed. I was like, that's okay. I don't think I need to do that. So that was one of many lies, that Aaron, his friends tell me that he told, that in his desperation to come up with some evidence that this happened. Like, for instance, he claims to ABC 2020 that he cut himself. His friends are like, he never cut himself. I've seen his arm. There's no scar there. He's never said anything about that. No one ever knew anything about that. He also claims to have been incredibly naive with regard to sex, because that's the narrative. Innocent 12-year-old boy doesn't know anything about sex. Bullcrap. All his friends are like, this guy was saying he was getting laid by girls constantly at 12 and 13 and has said, which I don't believe, which I think he's a storyteller, that he's, to this date, he's telling his friends he's had sex with 300 girls in his life. This is not a naive little kid who would have been susceptible to this. I've also spoken to the two people who organized the rally for Aaron Fisher. When his book came out, they were doing a rally to support him. These were two huge supporters of his who were not directly related to him, both of whom have gone on the record now saying they wish they had never done it, that they believe they were duped, that they believe that all of the interaction with his mom indicates that she was in on it, and that they do not believe his story. And then most recently, I have not released these yet, but I will, and I have them. I have on the record interviews on tape with not one, but two of his aunts, people who are very close to him, who say, he was not abused. And they tell me everyone else in the family is believing the same thing, but no, everyone's afraid to say it. So, and here's the most amazing thing. So I just listed like a dozen people close to him that say, no way, no signs of it. I don't believe it. It doesn't make sense, against their self-interest. I have not found anyone
who will credit his story,
who will come forward and say, whoa, dude, you got it wrong.
Yeah, I was around. I remember when he was whatever.
Right. No, and this is important because, my framingpaterno.com posts have gone viral within his community, which to me was one of the first indications, like, okay, wait a minute. This would never happen
within Aaron Fisher's community.
Right. Within Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. I am bombarded with people from Lock Haven friending me on Facebook, and posts that I do on Aaron Fisher go way more viral than any others that I do. And I can tell it's because people in his community, this is their way of saying, I don't believe Aaron.
We know you're bullshit.
It's without them having to say it themselves.
Right.
They share it on Facebook and they go, this is what I believe. They don't have to, there's no accountability because all they're doing is sharing a post by framingpaterno.com.
Right.
That would not be happening if he was telling the truth.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete Turner.
And if you like the show,
do us a favor.
Yeah, share it.
That's the biggest thing, honestly.
All your social media outlets, all your friends, let them know the ones that you like.
Yeah. I mean, we make this show for you guys. If you think it's great, say so. Say so by sharing it. Say so by putting a comment in after the show.
Also, if you go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts, give us a rating. Give us a review. If you think the show is great, please give us 5 stars and say so. And if you think the show really sucks, please give us 5 stars and say so.
Because, heck, we're listening.
That's right.
You can't be more approachable than us. We want to make the show better. If there's something that we're missing, let us know. That really is how you help us.
That's right. Tell us all about it. Thanks for listening.
And now back to the show.
Someone would be coming to me and saying,
Stop it.
Zig, you got it wrong. You
Yeah.
have to stop this. Exactly.
Well, he didn't act like he was telling the truth. I mean, having Jerry Sandusky be part of his life, a significant part of his life,
3 years,
vouching for him, being at one point a character witness for him. Yeah. He's not acting like he was abused.
Well, but the abuse experts will tell you, you can't understand what it's like to be abused. And I get that to a certain degree. I understand that. But I personally believe that we have swung the pendulum too far in this issue. I believe in the 60s and the 70s and 80s, it was too difficult for a child to come forward and claim abuse because no one would believe them, and we didn't want to accept that this was real, and there was probably a lot of legitimate fear, and that therefore there were some behaviors that didn't make a lot of sense that people misinterpreted. But I now believe, post-Catholic Church scandal especially, that the rules have been changed. The wind direction has been shifted. I've spoken to abuse victims from the 60s and 70s, males, who say to me, when I came forward, the wind was in my face. And that really hit home to me because I'm like, well, actually, in this case, all these accusers had a hurricane at their back.
Yeah.
At their back, they got a hurricane.
A hurricane of guilt.
Right.
That's
exactly.
We all feel guilt about
right,
this
exactly.
stuff. Yes.
And so it's understandable as a society that we have tried to overcorrect
Right.
Past injustices. We do this all the time. I think we've done it in the realm of race, for instance. We've got, all these horrible things that have happened in the realm of race in our history of our country. Well, now we feel like we got to overcorrect. Well, it's the same thing with child sex abuse. So now, if you get accused in a way that where, the breaks don't go your way, you are in big trouble. Because you got to prove your innocence in a way now where the experts have created the rules.
Sure.
Where it's impossible to prove your innocence.
Yes.
And I have actually said, I have asked numerous experts, they never get, or supposed experts, I never get a straight answer. Tell me what behavior by an accuser would be inconsistent with abuse. I never get an answer. And that should scare everybody. Wait a minute. There's no behavior that would be inconsistent with abuse. None. So therefore, no matter what happens, you're guilty.
Yes.
If more than one person comes forward, basically that's it. You're done. If you can get 2 or 3 people to come forward with a good story, you are toast. And that should scare all of us. This story is so much bigger than Jerry Sandusky, Penn State, or even Joe Paterno. And that's why I've stayed on it for so long. Although I got to tell you, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to continue with it because it's destroying my life. And I there's a couple more things going on that might lead to dead ends. And if that's the case, I got to accept the reality that I'm not going to win here. I've known for a long time I was not going to win. I'm okay with a losing
Even
battle.
a win is not a win. I mean,
Yeah, that's true. There's
as
no
you
way
describe it.
There's no way to win.
There's no happy ending.
No, you're right. I'm someone that believes that if it's a fight that's in principle and that you're fighting for something that's worthwhile, it doesn't matter necessarily that you win or lose. That there's some semblance of value in the fight.
You got to do it on
You
principle.
got to do it. You got to do it to the end. Well, I feel like I'm coming to the end. I feel like even though there's some things I got going on that could lead to some stuff, in a rational world that would blow the case wide open, I got some stuff I got enough stuff in a rational world on my computer to blow this case open, than I've even released. But this is not a normal case. This case is encased in cement and a nuclear bomb shelter because the news media is so invested in a narrative that was totally false. And how do you disprove a negative?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's almost impossible to do, but Aaron Fisher is the key to that. And to me, how anyone can look at the dozen or so people that I have on the record close to him speaking against their self-interest, saying, I don't believe it. There's never been any sign of it. It doesn't make any sense. And I think his mother is the heart of this whole thing.
Right. And you guys discussed the mother on Jay Morse that we get the influence and the money and that kind of thing. But if Aaron Fisher has fabricated this, if he has misremembered it, whatever it's going to be.
It's possible that a therapist helped him misremember.
Yeah, we talked about that too, right? And if the narrative is that victims don't know how to do this and you have to kind of walk them into it, I can see all of those things. If that was the only element that stunk in this whole thing,
Sure.
you could have some reasonable doubt and be like, well, listen, we're going to fall on the side of the victim.
I get it.
But you've got other things that are not even released yet that continue to blow the case apart. You have cops that are involved that shouldn't be involved, and give us some more of the things that just don't make any damn sense.
Well, you reminded me of something I referenced earlier, which I think you'll find to be an interesting story because it goes to Aaron Fisher and what I think really happened with Aaron Fisher and the mom, which I didn't get a chance to get into with Jay Moore. What I think happened here was Aaron Fisher's mother, her name is Dawn, her brother named DJ was a sex abuse victim himself in a very high profile case called the Dr. Barry Bender case. Very high profile meaning relative terms and locally in Pennsylvania. He was a doctor who had some really weird, he was paying kids to have sex in front of him and had sex with him. And well, Dawn's brother, DJ, was one of those guys. She told 2 of the people I've interviewed that I referenced who were helping to promote that rally that she had helped the police come in contact with her brother in the Barry Bender case. Now, why is that important? It's really important because here's why. In Aaron Fisher's book, the therapist talks about how a new detective came on the case after it hadn't been going anywhere, who I've referenced before, a guy by the name of Anthony Sassano, who was a narcotics detective.
Right.
And he was startled because he shows up at Aaron's house and Susano is setting up a surveillance phone call between Sandusky and Aaron Fisher. And he doesn't think that Aaron is ready for this.
Right.
And so he's like, whoa, what is going on here? Where did Susano come from and why is he doing this phone call? Well, take a guess who the lead detective in the Dr. Barry Bender case was.
Are you kidding me?
Anthony Susano.
Why even do that? It's.
So you see where I'm going with this. You see what happens. What really happens is this.
Yeah.
Dawn isn't getting any satisfaction with where the case is going. Mm-hmm. So she needs someone to facilitate it.
Right.
So she goes back to Anthony Susano, who she had given a key victim in the Barry Bender case. So Susano trusts her, and he thinks, by the way, the Barry Bender case started as a drug case because he was giving these kids drugs. And so he thinks he understands child molestation because it goes from a drug case to a molestation case. They get convictions. Bender ends up admitting guilt. He goes to prison. He's actually out now. And I've been trying to speak with him. I've spoken to people close to him, but I've been able to confirm that DJ Fisher, Dawn's brother, really was a victim in that case. It's very obvious to me that what happens is Dawn goes back to Susano and says, hey, look, I got my son who's involved in this thing. It's going nowhere. Can you help us out here? And Susano goes into action. That to me was a key moment in this. Dawn is absolutely, to me, the facilitator. She is a welfare queen by every definition, who now lives in a big house, who has 4 cars, including a Porsche, a Mercedes, and a Cadillac Escalade, which would never in a million years happen, in my view, and any woman I've ever spoken to's view, would never happen if you believed that that money came from your son's child molestation that occurred under your watch. You would have too much guilt. You might spend money on a house or whatever, but you would never do it on a Porsche, a Mercedes, a Cadillac Escalade, because the guilt would be off the charts.
It certainly speaks to greed, for sure. You know.
I have a witness, the neighbor, who literally witnessed the story, the first seed of this story being germinated. On video, you can see it at framingpaterno.com, who says he saw Aaron tell Dawn the first very, very, very minor story that started this whole thing. And Dawn, within an hour, is telling him, I'm going to own that motherfucker's house.
Yeah.
That's her first reaction, talking about Jerry Sandusky. I'm going to own that motherfucker's house. That's her exact words. She doesn't go to the police. She goes to the school, the public school, where Jerry is an assistant volunteer football coach. Now, why do you do that? You do that because you're looking for deep pockets. And she at first doesn't get satisfaction because the school is like, huh? What? Jerry? And I have spoken. This is one of the more ballsy things I did. The person who's now the principal of the school is a guy by the name of Steve Trishetta, who was the football coach who hired Jerry as an assistant at the time. And he was the assistant principal when all the crap hit the fan. Well, I was in State College last summer, and I decided, you know what? I'm going to stop in on Steve Trishetta because I wanted to find out what's going on here. Because because Jerry still speaks highly of this guy, even though Steve never spoke out for Jerry at all. So my gut is telling me Steve knows this is bullshit. And so I go in, and he has no idea who the hell he's meeting with. And I look him straight in the eye and I say, Steve, Jerry Sandusky is innocent. You need to understand this. And I need to understand what you know, what you don't know, and whether there's anything here's what I said to him. Is there something I don't know? Because I'm constantly like, if I'm wrong, please tell me.
Yeah, make this go away.
Please. So
create some relief here.
Right.
Anybody.
Thank you. Exactly. So if there's somebody who knows something, it's Steve Trishetta. He was the football coach with Aaron Fisher's high school when Jerry was there. He was the assistant principal. He's now the principal. Steve, can you tell me here?
Yeah.
Now, you know when you see someone, you look in their eyes, and they're telling you things that they can't tell you.
Yeah.
Steve knew I was right. And he says to me, I cannot talk to you now, but when I retire in 3 years, I can write these are his words, I can write a book worth $1 million.
Right.
I'm like, well, gee, thanks. Jerry might be dead in 3 years.
Sure.
I mean,
he might be dead in 3 years.
Right. So, well, it's 2 years now. So when he retires in 2 years, I guarantee he won't be, abide by his somewhat of a promise, but I'm going to call him because there's no question in my mind. He knew I was right. I left knowing, without any shred of a doubt, that he knew that Jerry was innocent, and that he, like many, many other people close to this case, are just afraid to say it because it is so toxic and it is so damaging. And here's a guy 2 years away from retirement, in a public school. If he says anything publicly against Aaron Fisher, he's done. He loses his retirement he loses everything. So he's not going to do it. But this is the perfect storm of this case. Everybody who's in a position to potentially stop this was too afraid to get in front of the runaway freight train. Yeah. Everybody. The cowardice in this case is maybe the most depressing thing in the whole deal for me. Because I'm a guy, I hate stupidity. I hate cowardice. I hate dishonesty. And this case has nothing but stupidity, dishonesty, and cowardice. And it drives me crazy because no one will stand up. I mean, literally, I can't think of anybody who has really stood up 100%.
But why would you? Why would you stand there?
Because it's the right thing. Because I don't want to live in a world where something like this can happen.
Somebody's just got to fucking do the right thing. Well, I mean, we're talking about
John's doing it and his life's getting ruined.
I know.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm sure it's hard for me to make the argument to other people. Hey, help me.
You're like, hey, this really sucks over here. Who wants to do it with me?
Yeah.
Like, that's like when your buddy comes up to you and goes like, hey, my fucking finger stinks. Smell it. And you're like, no thanks, man.
It's a weird analogy, but I think I know where you're going with that. Sure. I get it. And there's I have to tell you, here's the pattern I get. And you guys will appreciate this doing what you do. This happens all the time to me. I'll have someone come forward with information, and it'll be solid information. I'll check it out. I'll do an interview with them, a background interview or a pre-interview, as I call it, and they'll be fine. Mm-hmm. And then something happens the next day, and they almost invariably, they wimp out, either completely fall off the map, they run away, they won't return phone calls. It is so frustrating because it happens the same way every single time. It's like, here's what I think happens. People have some guilt, so they want to feel like they did something, so they come to me to tell their story, but they don't want they don't want to actually have to pay the price for that when it comes public. So they want to get rid of the guilt without actually paying any theoretical price. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
And this has happened not once, not twice, not three. This has happened at least 10 to 20 times, depending on how you define it, by some key people. I mean, and it's so frustrating.
Well, let me tell you, so in my line of work, doing spy things, I'm not really an interrogator, but I work in that kind of field. There's a buyer's remorse. And when that person cracks, because you work them and you get the emotions going and you get the truth out of them. And then when they have had time to cool off, sleep on it, they're like, hey, maybe I don't overdid it.
That's exactly what's happened here.
So that happens a lot for us. Like that's why we work hard when the person's warmed up and talking. And then whatever they say afterwards, it's just not
I wish I had
anymore.
some training in this because, I clearly have not been doing it well. Although I will say this. In the 4 years that I've been on this case, I think I now have qualified for a PhD in white trash because the white trash, this whole case is about white trash in rural Pennsylvania. These are the guys who were going to this charity, the Second Mile, and they're all white trash. And basically what happened was that investigators, once they decide Jerry Sandusky is a pedophile, they go into this pool of white trash kids who have been many of them probably abused for real at some point in their life. They have no dads. Their lives are a mess. They probably have bad marriages, no jobs, whatever. They need money. You go into that cesspool and you start waving theoretical dollars around.
You get some reaction.
We're not talking $25 here.
No, we're talking millions.
Yeah.
We're talking an average.
Life-changing money.
We're talking about an average of $3 million. An average of $3 million was given to each of these accusers, and there was no vetting.
Yes.
I mean, there was no vetting. Here's all you needed to do to get money from Penn State. If you were under the age of 30 years old, which means in Pennsylvania you're inside the statute of limitations, if you were a member of the Second Mile charity and they had a list of all the names, then you got money. If you came forward and said Jerry Sandusky did something sexual to you, you got money. If you said it happened on Penn State's campus, you got even more money.
Sure.
And if you didn't qualify on those first two, which we saw in the news recently, people probably remember that there were these headlines. Joe Paterno knew about Jerry Sandusky in 1976 and 1971. Those stories are such bullshit. It's an insult to bullshit. And here's what those were. Do the math. If you're 14, 15 years old in 1971 or 76, and you come forward in 2011 after the crap hits the fan and Penn State's got Fort Knox open, you got two major problems.
You're beyond the statute of limitations.
You're beyond the statute of limitations. That's the big one. The second one is the charity, the second mile, didn't start till 1977. Right. So because it hasn't started yet, you strike out on number. You strike one on statute of limitations, strike two on second mile. That means you got one strike left. So in order,
you got to put it on the campus.
You got to go to the mat. And the best way to go to the mat is you got to have a connection to Penn State. And what better connection to Penn State than I told Joe Paterno?
Yeah.
And that's
he
how
did
this.
Nothing.
And right, he did nothing. Oh, well, here you go. What's the name? What's the bank account?
Well, yeah. This is where the corruption comes in. You know, like the system. And look, I hope to God that we're not wrong on the victim status, because I'd hate to think. I'm with you on that, but that's why I'm willing to say this. So you've already got a guy that's already under the bus. There's already checks being written.
Right.
There's a guy who's dead. What are you going to do to him? Joe Paterno's going to be fine. His status is there. Why wouldn't you want to get paid? I can't put that past somebody that needs money. You know,
I actually believe, and this is just a belief from someone who's studied the case more than anyone should ever have been forced to. I believe, and I'm guessing on the percentage, I think that at least 50% of Jerry's accusers, if they knew that Aaron Fisher was lying, like if God said to them, if it exists, Aaron Fisher lied,
right?
I think 50% of them would go, holy fuck.
Sure.
Oh my God.
What have I done?
What have I done? Because what they were doing was they thought
they were joining the mob.
Right.
Yeah,
they thought they were helping put away a pedophile. And hell, he never did anything to me, but he could have.
He's always weird.
Yeah, he's always weird, and he was handsy and put his hand on my knee when we drove, which is what Jerry actually, that's the only thing that these accusers all say, which is the only thing that's actually true. He put his hand on their knee while driving. And so I think a lot of them go, well, I've got a crappy lot in life. This is my chance. You know, it's not going to hurt Jerry any. I mean, Jerry's already in prison. Penn State's got free money.
Yeah.
And so why not? Now, there's another percentage that I think, and I don't know, again, exact percentages, but I would say I'd say a few of them were convinced by therapists that this actually did happen. There's something called repressed memory therapy, which has been discredited in courtrooms.
Yes.
But there's at least one, I'll give you something that's not public. It's not actually done by me, but it's done by another person who was trying to write a book that Jerry was innocent, though he is a coward and won't do anything publicly because he can't get a publisher, even though he's a very well-known author, a guy by the name of Mark Pendergrast. He did an interview with victim number 7 under the guise that he was doing something for a research project, and he got him to admit that his story of Jerry Sandusky's abuse was based in repressed memory therapy. Now, repressed memory therapy is not legitimate. It's bogus. It's been completely discredited. It's not allowed in courtrooms.
It's dangerous.
Oh, well, it's absurd. I mean, the idea that you don't remember being raped is just, it's ridiculous. And of course, if you accept it as real, then that means that anybody can be convinced of anything. I mean, it sets a ridiculous precedent. But the point of all this, there's a lot of different points. I think that most of these accusers, I would like to believe, are not bad people. Like even Alan Myers.
Mm-hmm.
I've sent Alan Myers videos to his own email address, which I know is real, pleading with him, saying, Alan, 2 things. Please come forward and just tell the truth. And if I'm wrong, just send me an email. Dude, leave me alone. John, you're wrong. Whatever. I've gotten no response. I've gone to his house. He wasn't there. His wife was there. His wife didn't tell me I was wrong. She just told me to get out. Mm-hmm. We had an investigator come to him and speak to him very briefly. He didn't tell him we were wrong. He just told him, get out. Now, that doesn't necessarily prove anything, but all we're asking for is, to me, if somehow, in some weird world, Alan Myers is the strangest abuse accuser that has ever been, if that really happened, wouldn't he say, you got it wrong, leave me alone, I was abused?
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you say that? He's never said that. And I've made it as easy as possible for him. But I believe that Alan was convinced by Andrew Shubin that Jerry's a pedophile. He's a bad guy. You just didn't realize it. He was grooming you all those years. You dodged a bullet. You didn't realize you were abused, but you were abused. And this is your chance to make everything whole, that your life can be changed for the good.
Right.
And I think that Alan probably rationalized, because human beings are amazingly good at rationalizations, especially when they mean $3 million. And you can rationalize a lot for $3 million because that's what Alan got, minus $700,000 for Andrew Shubin, who was one of 9 accusers he represented in this case. So to me, I would like to believe that Alan Myers believes, it sounds counterintuitive, I would like him to think that he believes Jerry is a pedophile, that he's been convinced of it, and that's why he hasn't come forward. I don't know that to be the case, because the alternative scenario is really hard for me to take. Because here's a guy who, if you take the alternative scenario, is the biggest bastard I've ever heard of.
Sure.
A guy who was a sergeant in the Marine Corps who took an oath and who betrayed the guy he referred to as his father in a way that you couldn't even conceive of betrayal. And by the way, it's important to point out, didn't just betray Jerry Sandusky. His betrayal has caused 3 Penn State administrators to live under indictment, false indictment, for 4.5 years, which they're still living under.
Yeah.
I mean, Grant Spanier, Tim Curley, and Gary Schultz, all of whom are good people with sterling reputations. Grant Spanier has been one of the nicest guys I've dealt with in this entire situation. There's no chance in the world that Grant Spanier, who was an abuse victim himself, was any part of a cover-up of child sex abuse. It's not possible. But because Alan Myers stayed silent, those 3 people have lived under indictment. Joe Paterno's reputation could be completely exonerated if Alan Myers simply came forward and told the truth about what happened or did not happen in the Mike McQuarrie episode. But he won't do it because he's afraid of losing the $3 million and whatever is left of that. Although he's built a pretty nice house on the river there in Mill Hall, Pennsylvania. So I'm sure he doesn't have $3 million left. But the point is, if that's what's really happened, then wow. The idea that a Marine could do that to a guy who was as good to him as Jerry Sandusky.
Marine aside, I mean, that anybody could do that to someone that they loved.
It's hard for me to imagine.
So I want to know what's happened with the DA. Who was the DA at the time? Did that person? Yes. All
right.
Because this stuff all stinks. So you have to go to the DA because they benefit from this.
You're talking about Ray Grecar? Is that the
you
story?
Tell me you
well, but here's
I don't know. I don't know anything. I'm just saying that the DA must benefit from this because the DA is not going to say, let's not get a conviction. Tell me, is it in any way unrealistic to conceive this conversation? The DA looks at the cops and says, get me the evidence I need to put this guy in jail.
Maybe I'm being naive, but I'm a Republican conservative, if you haven't figured this out yet. So my inclination is always to believe the prosecution. Right?
Sure.
I mean, and I think, by the way, that's part of what got Joe Paterno in trouble. Joe Paterno was a Republican, and his son, Scott Paterno, who was his attorney on this, was a Republican lobbyist. And this was a Republican-led investigation by a Republican attorney general who had just become governor of the state. I think that compromised Joe Paterno enormously because he's thinking these people wouldn't be lying to me. Why is this going on here? But back to the point about the prosecution. I would like to believe that the prosecution thought that they were going after a monster, partially because they were seeing this through the lens of the Catholic Church scandal, which had been huge in Pennsylvania just a couple of years before. The key member of the Attorney General's office is a woman by the name of Janelle Eschbach. Janelle Eschbach is the reason why this case went forward the way that it did. Janelle Eschbach is an interesting person because she's a Penn State grad and a Penn State football fan. And this actually is what ended up, I believe, dooming Jerry Sandusky. Because Janelle Eschbach, and it's written about in Aaron Fisher's book, Janelle Eschbach could not understand why Jerry Sandusky would retire from Penn State in 1999 to be only the head of a kid's charity. In her mind, that made no sense because she's a huge Penn State football supporter. Sure. So she's thinking, why would a guy who isn't, 70 years old, I guess he was in his late 50s at that time, why would he retire to simply head a charity? And in her mind, that was inherently suspicious, which, by the way, to me, is one of the most tragic things in this entire case. If that's really what sparks suspicion now, that someone decides, you know what, I've had enough of coaching. I've been part of 2 national championships. I love working with kids, and it's inherently suspicious to retire to run an at-risk kids charity. Seriously? But that's where we're living now. But I think that we've already referenced this in a way that I've never spoken about before in any of the almost probably 200 interviews I've done on this case, because you guys are, I love how politically incorrect you are, and how willing you are to go where, you're willing to go to places other people would probably be afraid to. I believe that there's an interesting divide in this case among the way that the women in the prosecution and the men in the prosecution, view this case. A lot of the key people in this case are women. Janelle Eschbach, the attorney general who brings the case, Linda Kelly. Aaron Fisher's caseworker is a woman. The principal at the high school is a woman. This is really important because I believe, this is not a crack on women at all, I don't think women have any opportunity to understand the nature of a theoretical heterosexual boy at the age of 14 having some sort of a sex act with an old man. I think they think of it as an old man raping a girl. They think of it as if they were 13 or 14. That's plausible. Makes some sense. Interestingly, the men on the prosecution, Frank Fina and Joe McGettigan, they were the 2 prosecutors. They go out of their way at every opportunity to reduce the ages to the point of lying. They lied several times. It's 10 years old, 8 years old. Cause they know, cause they're guys.
Right.
They're guys. They know it's absurd for this to happen at 13, 14, 15. Sure. Yeah. But 8 to 10, as we've already referenced, is plausible. So Janelle Eschbach, I emailed her about a year and a half ago, just saying, hey, this was when I realized Jerry was innocent. Afterwards, I thought, maybe I'll email her and see what happens. So I email her very somewhat innocently saying, look, I really think you might have gotten this wrong. And I probably was a little snide. I think I might have said, I wonder how you sleep at night, something like that. I got no response from her, right. But I immediately got a cease and desist letter from her attorney for an email. By the way, the letter said you are not to contact her or any member of her family. And I'm like, what? All because I sent her it was like a maybe 3-paragraph email there was no thread or anything remotely like that in there. I thought that is a really odd response from somebody if they're not insecure, right? If you're secure that you know what you did the right thing, the whole world's telling you you're a hero, by the way. And if I'm a nut job, do you even worry about an email from me? But if I strike a nerve, you get your lawyer, cease and desist. And by the way, her husband is potentially a key figure in this. I don't know. This goes down the rabbit hole a little bit. I'm not a conspiracy person, but her husband's name gets connected. He's a former police officer, and I guess he's now kind of a magistrate in York, Pennsylvania. And his name has come up in some elements of this case that I find highly suspicious post my involvement. And I'm not a conspiracy person at all. So I'm very hesitant to even believe all this kind of stuff. But there's some weird stuff going on there. And it's all consistent with people who don't feel confident that they got it right. And in fact, this goes back to what you said at the very beginning of this interview. Go read The Other Side. One of the first things that made me go, what? Was the only interview that the prosecutors did with Armin Katayan.
Who's Armin Katayan?
He is an HBO sportscaster who is completely in the tank on this case. He has no clue. He thinks Joe Paterno covered up. He thinks he's sure Sandusky's guilty. He doesn't know anything about the case, but he's been covering it from day one. He's like a celebrity, quote unquote reporter. He interviews Joe McGettigan and Frank Fina, the 2 prosecutors for HBO Sports, the only major interview they've done. And at that time, when they did that interview, I still thought Jerry was probably guilty. I didn't think he was totally guilty because I thought some of this stuff seems really weird, but I'm still thinking he's guilty. I watched that interview. I'm like, what? Dudes, you're like convincing me he's innocent because you're lying constantly. I know some of the things they're saying are not true, and a lot of the things they're saying make no sense, and they're trying to make victim number 4, who we've not mentioned, the star of their case, which, by the way, why would you do that? The only reason why you would do that is if you didn't trust victim number 1. Victim number 1 is your star. Right. He was your first one. He was the guy that was there for 2 years. He's the one that claims 100.
He's the guy that wrote a character reference.
He writes a book called, Silent No More.
Right.
They basically discard Aaron Fisher at trial, and now all of a sudden they got this new star. Well, the new star has massive problems with their case, and they're trying to pretend in this interview like he was tremendous and so dramatic. They never mentioned the fact that at trial, and Jay Moore and I talked about this, and I think Jay was pretty shocked by it because it's really the smoking gun of the trial. If there's one thing people should know about the trial, it's that there was a tape.
Yes, this is huge.
There was a tape that was played at trial of the interrogation of victim number 4, the prosecution's new star witness, where the investigators thought that they were turning the tape recording off, but they didn't. And on the tape recording, you hear victim 4's attorney. And by the way, why does he have an attorney at this time? There's no need for him to have an attorney. He's not under investigation. Yeah. He's a victim. He's a victim being asked about a potential victim, what happened with Jerry Sandusky. So he's got a lawyer there already. And this is April, I believe, of 2011, way before the national shit has hit the fan. And on tape, the lawyer says to the investigators, can we lie? I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close. Can we lie to him and say we've got accusers who say this, this, and this to get him to say that he had sex with Jerry Sandusky? And the investigators say, oh, yeah, sure, we do this all the time. We tell him we got this, this, and this, even if we don't really have it, so that
he can feel like he's not breaking the case. He's just corroborating.
Exactly.
That's normal. I mean, that happens. We do that in the intel world, too. Yeah. I mean, you control the information for the person you're interviewing or interrogating. So, absolutely.
Well, in this case, you guys, I think, both can see how corrosive that is. Because to your point, he's just corroborating. Oh, you mean it's not on me. I'm just helping out. I'm just helping put a monster behind bars. And by the way, my attorney tells me this could be good for us.
Right.
So when they come back, all of a sudden, victim 4, voila, he's telling a story that's totally different, and he's claiming that he had sex with Jerry Sandusky. Interestingly, to me, I'll show you guys this, when we're done with this, although my phone is dead. So I may have to send it to you. But when Jerry Sandusky, retires, there is a photo in the front page of the newspaper the next day of him playing miniature golf with a young boy who's not that small. He's actually pretty hulky and fairly tall. And this was in the spring of 1999. Now, that boy, who is, by the way, his name is in the caption. Now, in order to get the name, Occam's razor, here's what happens. Yeah. The photographer says to Jerry, hey, by the way, what's the kid's name?
Right.
And Jerry says his name is Brett. Mm-hmm. Well, that Brett, who was in the front page of the newspaper with Jerry, was victim number 4.
Right.
Now, what's amazing about this is that date is both before and after victim number 4 testifies that he was sexually abused at bowl games by Jerry Sandusky. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's impossible that the boy would want to be playing miniature golf with the guy who's been sexually abusing him. I guess that's theoretically possible. But again, if you look at the picture, he looks really happy to be there, and he's not a tiny little innocent kid. But here's the most important thing. Jerry Sandusky, criminal mastermind, is going to not only be photographed with this kid, but give the local newspaper his name before and after he's sexually molesting him at bowl games? Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously. That's impossible. That is absurd. Right?
Well, we pointed out that Jerry Sandusky is at best aloof when it comes to social situations. So maybe
I'm talking about but he needs to be a criminal mastermind.
Right.
See, that's my point.
Where it doesn't add up.
He needs to me, that's why it's relevant.
They've painted him not as a guy who's socially aloof. They've painted him as a guy who's a plotter, who's a strategist who manipulated these kids and who stacked them all up and manipulated them.
He's a manipulative genius.
Yeah.
I mean, I know one of the attorneys has said that this was, and one of the plaintiff's attorneys, the accuser's attorneys, has said he was the greatest defensive coordinator in the history of Penn State. This was the way his mind works. He was defending himself against all these different accusers over all these years, making sure he plotted and manipulated and was able to protect himself. I'm like, what? Those are two totally different. Running a defense in football is completely different than running a massive criminal conspiracy for child molestation. And there is no sign at all that Jerry is a criminal mastermind. In fact, he's the opposite. He's a dope when it comes to this. And I know it because I've dealt, as I mentioned earlier, on both sides of the fence here. He's a complete dope strategy-wise. I'm amazed he was ever a great defensive coordinator. One, because I can't believe he was able to think quickly enough because he talks so slowly. But also because he's so naive. I mean, he is unbelievably naive. I mean, he still to this day thinks that he's going to get out of prison. Now, he might be less confident of that than he was, but there's only two choices there. He would have to be criminally insane or he's innocent, because he has to know that the chances of that are impossible unless he's innocent. Heck, he is innocent and there's no chance of him getting out. If he was guilty, there would really be no chance of him ever getting out. But he thinks that he will. And I've told him I've said, Jerry, because they stopped the email system at his prison, so it's harder to communicate with him. And so it'll be just before they stop the email system, I said, Jerry, I'm going to leave you with two things that I want you to, never, ever, ever, ever forget. We never communicate again. You need every single day to think about every day I stay alive is another chance the truth in this case can come out, because as soon as you die, no one cares.
No one cares.
It's over. And number two, you got to write down everything that you, in your version of what really happened here, because when and if you do die, there needs to be a record of it.
Sure.
And, I don't know if he's doing it. I do know he's doing everything he can to stay alive. I don't think it's going to be long enough, because I don't think his attorney has a flippin' clue about what's really happening here. I think they're running the clock out on him in Pennsylvania. I think that there are people who know he's innocent
and are just waiting him out.
Well, the sister's not
including the judge, by the way, the current judge of the post-conviction relief process.
Right. Who's
the same judge who oversaw the original trial. So holy conflict of interest Batman. Yeah. He is in a situation where he's being asked to overturn by far the biggest trial he's ever overseen, which is no one's ever going to do that, especially against public opinion.
That's his own, it's his own case. So we're in the home stretch here. Actually, John, thank you so much, man. We convinced you to come and talk with us for an hour, and we got 2 hours and 15 minutes.
That seems to be the normal time period when just to get to the essence of this story. But I appreciate you guys being willing to listen with an open mind, because that's all I've ever asked. Yeah. That's all I've ever asked is just listen to it with an open mind, because this is not a conspiracy
thing. That makes the story so compelling, is that you're not asking anybody to do anything. You're not asking for a stretch. No. You're just asking for people to just listen and do the math. Read the other side of the argument for yourself.
Yes.
Read everything.
No, I absolutely urge people to do that.
I mean, you're not trying to discredit anything anybody's written. No. You're saying go read it. They'll tell you themselves it doesn't make sense. Yeah. No. They'll point out the places where the math doesn't work. You
have to understand the basics of the case, which you can find out more not only from this podcast, but from framingpaterno.com. We've mentioned many times, I wish I didn't have to do this. I wish I could move on with my life. But it's really been a pleasure to have two guys who know the case and are open-minded and care enough about the truth to not worry about, oh my gosh, this is politically incorrect, or, oh my gosh, someone might criticize me. Because if we live in a world where we're afraid to even examine the other side of a story this important, we're in a whole heap load of trouble. We really are.
On our show, we do a lot of different things. We have a lot of different topics. We invited and they said, yes, we invited Monsanto to come on. We're not trying to convince anybody to eat genetically modified anything, but we don't want to just get spoon-fed an answer. We want to understand, that Monsanto was not an inherently evil organization, no matter how, the more anybody tells us that, it's like, hey, come on. At least let's hear their side of it, So here we have this, we've seen railroad jobs. We've seen the media take control of something. The whole, Dassey Avery case in Wisconsin. If that guy killed that lady, have you seen the documentary?
I have, and it's funny you mentioned this because I did want to end. I guess we're ending, but one of the things I wanted to mention is it's frustrating to me that other cases that are not nearly as credible.
That's not nearly as
what I'm
obvious in so many places either.
One, the topic is murder.
Right.
And that's a lot. We can flip on that.
I agree.
We can flip on that.
I happen to believe that he's guilty. I just so you know.
Either way, and I kind of lean that way. I don't know about the young kid. I do know the young kid ended up going to jail in part because the cops were convinced that he had to go to jail. I mean, there's no blood evidence. There's none of this stuff.
Right.
So
I can understand that.
And I love my police friends and everything else, but their institution is designed to find the evidence to put people in jail. And like you said, once you have someone convinced or once a victim comes out and says this happened, how do you prove otherwise? There's it's a he said, she said, but the victim always gets the benefit of the doubt, and that's dangerous. I'm not saying that.
No, it absolutely is dangerous. And just to finish on the point about other conspiracy theories, it frustrates me to no end that some people think I'm a conspiracy theorist because I'm an ardent anti-conspiracy theorist, and it really frustrates the hell out of me. I referenced that this case is the opposite of the O.J. Simpson case in so many ways, that this bogus idea that somehow O.J. Simpson's son is the real murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, that now with a Martin Sheen documentary is getting more credibility and more traction than anything I've done, despite 2 Today Show appearances with Matt Lauer and a bunch of other, hundreds of other interviews that I've done in this case, is so frustrating to me that load of crap, which makes no sense. There's no evidence of it. There's massive amounts of evidence contradicts it. But because that's safe, I mean, you're allowed to say that Jerry Sandusky molested people on Mars, and the media will go, wow, that's amazing. He's the first child molester in the history of Mars. I mean, but if you say, wait a minute, he's actually innocent. Whoa! Yeah. Well, wait, you're not allowed to say that. Yeah. This is the only case you're not allowed to even talk about the other side. You're literally not. I recently had an interview scheduled on NBC National Radio, by the host that got canceled by his management because
they don't want it.
They don't want the topic.
Hot potato. It's the third rail of crime.
Yeah. But there's never been another case where you're not even allowed to discuss it. And as I mentioned, you can come up with any crack. Anybody can kill JFK, and if you have a theory on that, and that's legitimate. That OJ, his son deal it's a perfect example.
Have you ever been to Dealey Plaza?
No, but I know.
When you go open that window, you're like, oh, there's no doubt. He shot the hell out of him.
Right.
It's not even they act like it's a hard shot. That's not a hard shot.
I'm a big believer that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
That's Occam's razor right there, too. I'll take that any day of the week. That's the simple, makes sense.
Interestingly,
100-yard shot.
When I was a young guy, like when I was 22, I was an ardent conspiracy theorist. I figured it was the mafia. And then I really delved into it. And I realized, wait a minute, this is ridiculous.
You done work with the 9/11 stuff? Where do you stand on that?
Well, no, I'm not a conspiracy theorist on 9/11. I did a movie called Blocking the Path to 9/11, which is about the censorship of a miniseries called The Path to 9/11.
I mean, you're proving that you're not a conspiracy theorist guy because you think that Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy.
Oh, absolutely.
You're not against
I'm positive
the 9/11
of it.
thing. Yeah.
No, 9/11 was no.
So
in fact, I have more disdain for the 9/11 truthers than I have for almost any human beings. I mean, I cannot stand those people at all. And I sometimes get compared to them, and it drives me batty because it's completely unfair. I'm the non-conspiracy theorist in this case. The media is actually believing in a conspiracy that is nonsensical, impossible to have pulled off, and for which there is no evidence or rationale. Yeah. There's not even a rationale. Why the fuck would Joe Paterno cover up for a former assistant coach he didn't like?
Right.
Why? No one can ever answer that question. There is no reason for it because it didn't happen.
Right.
It didn't happen, folks. This is a fairy tale. The whole story is a fairy tale.
You should go to framingpaterno.com, read for yourself, look at all the footage, read the books from all of the accusers, read Aaron Fisher's book,
Please.
and go check out More Stories, episode 339 with John Ziegler. Once again, John, thank you so much.
Guys, it's been a pleasure. Really appreciate you taking the time to listen to the truth.
Terrific. Thank you.